The sky over the Sahara burned gold as the alien vessel descended. Its surface shimmered like liquid crystal, refracting sunlight into dazzling colors that danced across the desert sands. The air itself seemed to hum with its presence, a low vibration that settled deep in the chest of every onlooker. Around the world, billions watched the scene unfold on screens, holding their collective breath. In a remote operations tent, Dr. Ilara Riven stared at the live feed with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She had spent her life studying theoretical xenobiology, but this, real contact, was something she never thought she would witness. Ilara adjusted her glasses, her fingers trembling slightly as she scribbled notes in the margins of her tablet. The broadcast feed crackled, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed across the sand. Two figures emerged from the ship, their forms humanoid yet undeniably alien. Veyran, the taller of the two, stepped forward first. His silver skin seemed to ripple like a calm lake beneath moonlight. Beside him, Kadrin's golden hue gleamed with a softer, more muted radiance, though his piercing gaze betrayed a sharpness equal to his brother's. When Veyran spoke, his voice resonated as if carried on the wind, effortlessly bypassing barriers of language and culture. Humans of Earth, we come not in conquest but in challenge. Your kind speaks of greatness, of the resilience and beauty of your race. We wish to see this greatness, to test it against our own. The words sent ripples of unease through the gathered scientists, soldiers, and diplomats. Ilara felt her stomach churn. Challenges from beings so advanced rarely ended well for the less advanced party. "Explain your challenge," a voice boomed from a nearby loudspeaker, belonging to General Thorne, the official military liaison for this unprecedented encounter. His tone was authoritative, but Ilara noticed the way his hands gripped the edges of the control table, white-knuckled. "We speak of life," Kadrin answered, his voice softer, but no less commanding. "Your ability to create it, to nurture it, to perfect it. Our species has mastered the art of reproduction, creating flawless beings free from defect or imperfection. We ask you to demonstrate your own methods. Show us the strength you claim lies in your humanity." Ilara felt the room grow colder despite the oppressive desert heat. This was not a challenge of weapons or strategy, but something far more personal, something they couldn't manipulate with technology or brute force. The ship opened wider, revealing an interior of shimmering light and strange organic curves. Veyran's voice echoed again. "Prepare your best minds and your greatest truths. We await your answer." The feed cut, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Ilara's hand hovered over her tablet, unsure whether to jot down observations or simply stare. "What the hell does that even mean?" Duran, her assistant, muttered beside her, breaking the silence. His youthful energy often bordered on recklessness, but this time Ilara could see genuine fear in his eyes. "They want to see how we reproduce," Ilara said, her voice quieter than she intended. General Thorne turned toward her, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. "Dr. Riven, I trust you have ideas. You're leading this." Ilara blinked, caught off guard. "Me? I wasn't expecting—" "You're the foremost expert in biological systems and theoretical xenoreproduction," Thorne interrupted. "If anyone can handle this, it's you." She wanted to protest, to shrink back into the safety of her research and leave this to someone else. But deep down, Ilara knew she couldn't. This was her moment, however terrifying it might be. "I'll need time," she said, standing straighter despite the knot tightening in her chest. "And a team. We can't rush this." "You've got 48 hours, Thorne said bluntly. "The world is watching and the clock's ticking." Ilara exhaled sharply, nodding. "Fine, 48 hours." The next 2 days were a blur of frantic preparation. Ilara and her team debated endlessly about how to approach the challenge. Should they focus on the science of reproduction, the emotional bonds that tied families together, the cultural significance of parenthood? Each answer seemed both too simple and impossibly complex. When the day finally came, Ilara found herself standing before the alien princes, their towering forms casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Veyran and Kadrin regarded her with an intensity that made her feel like an insect under a magnifying glass. "We will show you," Ilara began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "that reproduction for humans is not merely a biological function, but an act of profound connection." It's messy, unpredictable, and imperfect, but that's where its beauty lies. Veyron tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his silver eyes. Then demonstrate this beauty you speak of. Ilara gestured toward a large screen where a montage began to play. It showed the process of human reproduction in all its stages: conception, gestation, birth, and beyond. There were no sterile diagrams or clinical explanations. Instead, the footage captured real moments of vulnerability and joy. A mother holding her newborn for the first time. A father laughing as his toddler took their first shaky steps. Families coming together, tears of pain and happiness mingling as they welcomed new life. Kadrin's golden eyes narrowed as he watched. I see inefficiency, pain, chaos. Why celebrate such flawed processes? Because those flaws make it real, Ilara said, her voice firm. Every child is unique, shaped not by perfection, but by the love and effort of those who raise them. We don't just create life, we create stories, connections, futures. That's something you can't program. The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara held her breath, unsure whether her words had struck a chord or fallen on deaf ears. Finally, Veyron spoke, his voice quieter than before. You speak with conviction, yet we struggle to grasp this connection you describe. It seems intangible, illogical. Kadrin stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Ilara. If what you say is true, then let us experience it. Let us enter your hearts. Ilara frowned, confused. What do you mean? To understand this connection, we must feel it, Veyron clarified. We wish to interface with your emotional core, the organ from which this love emanates. Jaran, standing just behind Ilara, whispered, They want to get inside our hearts? Is that even possible? Ilara hesitated, the request both unsettling and intriguing. For you want to feel human emotions? Yes, Kadrin said simply. Ilara exchanged glances with her team. The implications of such an experiment were staggering, but it could also be the key to bridging the gap between their species. All right, she said finally. We'll do it. The next step involved a neural interface that allowed the princes to temporarily experience human emotions. Ilara volunteered to be the subject, knowing the process would be invasive, but determined to see it through. As the connection was established, she felt an odd tugging sensation in her chest, as if her emotions were being drawn outward. For the first time, the prince's expressions changed. Veyron's stoic demeanor cracked as he gasped softly, his abbey silver skin dimming ever so slightly. Kadrin staggered, his golden glow flickering as he pressed a hand to his chest. This, Kadrin whispered, his voice trembling. This is overwhelming. Veyron nodded, his gaze distant. I feel longing, joy, pain. It is unlike anything we have known. Tears pricked Ilara's eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were hers or a side effect of the interface. Now you understand, she said softly. This is what it means to be human. When the connection was severed, the princes stood in silence, their expressions unreadable. Then, without a word, they turned and walked back to their ship. The world waited anxiously for their response. Hours passed before Veyron and Kadrin emerged again, their auras calmer, their gazes softer. We have seen the truth of your words, Veyron said, his voice carrying a newfound warmth. Your reproduction is not superior, nor is it inferior. It is different, and in its difference it holds a beauty we cannot replicate. Ilara felt a weight lift from her chest. Humanity had not only met the challenge, but shown the princes something they had never known. The power of imperfection, of connection, of love. As the alien ship ascended into the sky, leaving Earth behind, Ilara couldn't help but smile. They had not won through strength or intellect, but through the one thing that truly defined them, their humanity. The Torvaran ship disappeared into the sky, leaving a faint ripple of energy in its wake, but the impact of their visit lingered like an unshakable storm. Dr. Ilara Riven stood motionless in the desert, the hum of machinery and the murmurs of her colleagues fading into the background. She closed her eyes, breathing in the dry, warm air as she processed what had just occurred. "They left without conquest," Joran said from beside her, breaking her reverie. His voice held a note of disbelief. "No demands. No superiority. Complex at the end. Just respect. Did we really pull this off?" Ilara nodded faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the ship had vanished. "They didn't just leave with respect, Joran. They left with understanding, a piece of us. That's something they'll never forget." The desert grew eerily quiet again, save for the occasional gust of wind kicking up grains of sand. The other members of the team began packing equipment, their chatter filled with nervous energy. Though the immediate crisis had passed, none of them could shake the weight of what had transpired. But Ilara felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just observing humanity from the cold, clinical perspective of a scientist. She had seen it, felt it, in its rawest, most vulnerable form, through the eyes of beings who had never known its depth. "What do you think they'll do now?" Joran asked, his eyes still fixed on the empty sky. "I think they'll reflect," Ilara said softly. "And maybe they'll try to grow. They've been so focused on perfection that they forgot how much beauty there is in chaos." Joran gave a low chuckle. "It's ironic, isn't it? Aliens come all this way to challenge us, and we teach them something they didn't even know they were missing. If only we could get the rest of humanity to listen that easily." Ilara turned to face him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "One step at a time." Back at the base, the atmosphere was electric with activity. Reporters and officials swarmed the perimeter, demanding updates, while the team worked tirelessly to compile their findings for global release. Ilara moved through it all like a ghost, her mind elsewhere. The encounter with the Torvarons had stirred something deep within her, a question she couldn't yet articulate. Later that evening, she retreated to her temporary quarters, a small, sterile room with a single cot and a desk piled high with notes. She sat down and stared at the scattered pages, her thoughts swirling. The image of Veyran and Kadrin reacting to human emotions replayed in her mind. The shock in their expressions. The raw vulnerability in their voices. For being so advanced, their understanding of life had been so narrow, so clinical. And yet they had been open enough to learn. Ilara leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh. "What else don't we understand?" she murmured to herself. A knock at the door startled her. She glanced up to see General Thorne standing. In the doorway, his stern demeanor softened slightly by the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "Dr. Riven," he said, stepping inside, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you did today. You represented humanity better than anyone else could have." Ilara gave him a tired smile. "Thank you, General. But it wasn't just me. It was all of us. The memories, the stories, the feelings, they're what made the difference." Thorne nodded, his gaze heavy with thought. "Still, you were the one who stood in front of them and made them see it. That takes courage." She shrugged lightly, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. "I think it was less courage and more desperation. I just didn't want to let them leave thinking we were hollow." "They didn't," Thorne said firmly, "and the world won't forget that." He paused for a moment, then added, "What do you think it means, though? For us, for them, do you think they'll come back?" Ilara hesitated. "Maybe, but if they do, I don't think it'll be to challenge us again. I think it'll be to share, to learn more." Thorne gave a small grunt of agreement. "Let's hope you're right. The last thing we need is another test like this." After he left, Ilara sat in silence, her thoughts drifting to the future. Would the Torvarons share what they had learned with other worlds? Would they return as allies, eager to collaborate? Or would their understanding fade over time, lost to the endless pursuit of perfection? One thing was certain. Humanity had left its mark on them, just as they had on humanity. The next morning, Ilara woke to the sound of her tablet buzzing incessantly. She groggily reached for it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the notification. Incoming message, Torvaran vessel. She sat up straight, her pulse racing as she opened the message. A holographic image of Veyran and Kadrin appeared, their features softer and more open than before. "Dr. Riven," Veyran began, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't heard before. We wish to express our gratitude for your willingness to share your truth with us. It has left an indelible impression on us both, Kedron continued, his golden hue glowing faintly. We have much to consider, and much to change within ourselves and our species, but we also recognize that there is much more to learn. If you are willing, we would like to maintain this connection, to continue exchanging knowledge and understanding. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. This was more than she could have hoped for. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thrum of her heartbeat. "We would be honored," she whispered, and in that moment, Ilara knew that the story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The holographic message faded, leaving Ilara sitting alone in her dimly lit quarters, the faint echo of Veyran's voice still resonating in her mind. The possibilities of what this connection could mean filled her with equal parts excitement and trepidation. What would it look like to maintain communication with beings so vastly different, yet eerily similar in their pursuit of understanding? These next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The message from the Torvarons had been shared with the global coalition overseeing interspecies relations. Diplomatic teams scrambled to prepare protocols for continued communication, while scientists like Ilara were pulled into endless meetings to discuss the implications. Ilara, however, couldn't shake the personal nature of the message. The words, "exchange knowledge and understanding," felt less like an institutional opportunity and more like a direct challenge to her as an individual. The Torvarons hadn't just asked humanity, they had asked her. Late one evening, she found herself in the desert again, staring at the stars. The base behind her buzzed with activity, but out here it was quiet, the vast emptiness of the Sahara, stretching out like an endless canvas. The stars felt closer now, as if their light carried the faintest traces of something alive, watching. She almost didn't hear the soft crunch of sand behind her. "Ilara," Duran's voice called out gently. "You're going to freeze out here." She turned to see him holding a thermos of tea and a blanket, his expression equal parts concern and curiosity. He handed them to her without asking, settling down on the sand beside her. "Thanks," she murmured, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth was welcome against the chill of the night. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the stars above twinkling in their shared gaze. Finally, Duran broke the stillness. "You've been quiet since their message. What's on your mind?" Ilara sighed, her breath misting in the cold air. "Everything, nothing. I don't know, Jaren. It's just... this feels bigger than I imagined. Bigger than any of us." "It is bigger," Duran said with a small laugh. "Alien princes showing. Up challenging our entire species, and then asking for a pen pal. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty big." Ilara chuckled despite herself, the tension in her chest easing slightly. "It's not just that. They're asking us to help them understand something they've spent centuries avoiding: emotion, connection, imperfection. And I keep wondering if we're even capable of explaining it to them, or if they're even capable of truly understanding." Duran tilted his head, considering her words. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about understanding it all at once. Maybe it's about trying." Ilara looked at him, the sincerity in his tone catching her off guard. "You sound like you've been thinking about this more than I realized." He shrugged, his smile faint. "Well, you're not the only one who felt something when they were here. I think they shook all of us a little, made us realize how much we take for granted about being human." Ilara nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the stars. "They did, and maybe that's what scares me. If they come back, when they come back, what happens if we disappoint them? What if we fail to show them the best parts of us?" Duran placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Ilara, you didn't fail them the first time. You showed them something they'd never seen before, something that moved them. That's more than anyone else could have done. Trust yourself. Trust us." The words settled over her like a balm, easing the tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The stars above seemed to pulse brighter for a moment, and Ilara allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks, Jaren, I needed that." The following weeks were a blur of preparation for the next phase of contact. The Torvarons had sent another message, this time detailing their proposal, a shared exchange of cultural and biological knowledge through direct collaboration. They suggested starting with a smaller team, one that could act as a bridge between their species. Ilara was, unsurprisingly, chosen as humanity's lead. The day of the first formal exchange arrived with an almost tangible air of anticipation. The Torvarons had promised to return in their ship, this time to transport a delegation to Torvaron itself. The thought of leaving Earth, of stepping into the heart of an alien civilization, filled Ilara with equal parts awe and anxiety. The ship appeared in the sky just as it had the first time, its crystalline surface catching the sunlight and scattering rainbows across the desert. This time, however, the arrival felt less like an invasion and more like the return of old acquaintances. As the ship descended, Veyron and Kadrin emerged once more, their regal forms illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's interior. They greeted Ilara with a subtle nod, their expressions more open than before. "Dr. Riven," Veyron said, his voice carrying the same warmth she had heard in their message. "We are pleased to see you again." "And we're ready to begin," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. As she stepped onto the ramp leading into the ship, she glanced back at Joran, who offered her an encouraging thumbs up. She smiled, the gesture a small but grounding reminder of what she was carrying with her, humanity's hopes, its flaws, and its infinite capacity for connection. The journey ahead would be unlike anything she had ever experienced. But for the first time she felt ready. The ship hummed softly as it ascended, the sands of the desert shrinking beneath Ilara's feet. She stood by the viewport, her reflection faintly visible against the darkening sky. Beside her, Veyron and Kadrin observed silently, their postures regal but relaxed. The other members of the small human delegation settled into their assigned quarters, their nervous chatter muffled by the ship's smooth, rhythmic vibrations. Ilara's thoughts wandered as the Earth faded into the vast expanse of space. She wasn't just leaving her planet. She was stepping into the unknown, a journey that felt less like an exploration of another species and more like a dive into the depths of humanity's own soul. Veyron broke the silence, his voice low and contemplative. "You seem pensive, Dr. Riven." She turned to face him, offering a faint smile. "I suppose I am. This is all overwhelming, exciting, but overwhelming." Kadrin tilted his head, the soft glow of his golden features intensifying slightly. "It is understandable. Your species has not yet ventured deeply into the cosmos, and the weight of representing an entire world must be significant." Ilara chuckled softly. "That's an understatement." She glanced back at the viewport. "But it's more than that. I keep thinking about how much of humanity I'm bringing with me. Not just knowledge or science, but all the things that make us who we are. The good, the bad, and everything in between." Veyron nodded thoughtfully. "That duality is what fascinates us most. We have spent countless cycles seeking to eliminate imperfection, yet in doing so we have lost something we cannot define. You and your people have reminded us that imperfection is not a flaw, it is a foundation." His words resonated deeply with Ilara. She had spent years studying the intricacies of human biology and behavior, dissecting their complexities in sterile labs. Yet here, in the presence of beings who had never known the messiness of humanity, she was seeing it through new eyes. The ship's soft hum shifted, signaling their arrival at the Torvaron homeworld. Ilara's breath caught as the planet came into view, a vast sphere of crystalline structures glowing with soft, pulsating light. The cities seemed to grow organically. From the surface, their architecture fluid and harmonious, blending seamlessly with lush, iridescent landscapes. "This is Torva," Veyron said, his voice carrying a note of pride. "Our home." "It's beautiful," Ilara murmured, her eyes wide as the ship descended. As they landed, the delegation was escorted into a grand hall, its walls shimmering like liquid silver. The air was crisp and carried a faint, melodic hum, as though the very planet was alive. Torvarons of various hues and forms gathered, their curious gazes fixed on the human visitors. Ilara felt the weight of their scrutiny, but met it with steady resolve. This was why she was here, to bridge the gap between their worlds, to show them what it meant to be human. The exchange began with a formal presentation. Veyron and Kadrin introduced their delegation, detailing their intent to learn and grow. From this partnership, Ilara spoke next, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She spoke not just of humanity's achievements, but of its struggles, its failures, and its resilience. She spoke of love, loss, and the indomitable spirit that had carried them through millennia. As the days turned into weeks, the exchange deepened. The Torvarons shared their advanced technologies and philosophies, their civilization's history, etched in intricate patterns of light and sound. The humans, in turn, shared their stories, art and music, their laughter and tears weaving an emotional tapestry that left the Torvarons visibly moved. One evening, as the delegation gathered in a quiet chamber overlooking the crystalline city, Veyron approached Ilara. He held a small, glowing sphere in his hands, its surface rippling like water. "This is for you," he said, offering it to her. Ilara took the sphere carefully, its warmth surprising against her skin. "What is it?" "A record of our time together," Veyron explained. "It contains the thoughts and emotions we have experienced during this exchange. It is unprecedented for us to create such a thing, but we felt it was necessary." Ilara stared at the sphere, her throat tightening. "Thank you, this means more than I can say." Kadrin joined them, his golden light softer than usual. "We must also thank you, Dr. Riven. You have shown us a path we had long forgotten, a path of connection and vulnerability. We do not yet fully understand it, but we will continue to learn." Ilara smiled, her eyes glistening. "And we'll continue to learn from you. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." The Torvarons nodded in agreement, their expressions calm, but filled with a quiet intensity. As the delegation prepared to return to Earth, the farewell was bittersweet. The bonds they had formed were unlike anything Ilara had ever experienced, a fusion of cultures and perspectives that felt both fragile and unbreakable. Standing on the ramp of the Torvaron ship, she turned to Veyron and Kadrin one last time. "Thank you for trusting us, for trusting me. I'll carry this experience with me always." "And we will carry you with us," Veyron replied, "until we meet again." The journey back to Earth was filled with reflection. The sphere Veyron had given her pulsed faintly in her hands, its warmth a constant reminder of the connections they had forged. When they landed, the world was waiting. Cameras flashed, reporters clamored for statements, and officials swarmed to debrief the delegation. But through it all, Ilara remained calm, her mind focused on the bigger picture. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe, not as conquerors or competitors, but as equals. In the months that followed, the exchange continued through holographic communications and shared projects. Humanity began to adapt some of the Torvarons' advanced technologies, while the Torvarons incorporated human art and storytelling into their culture. Ilara often found herself back in the desert at night, staring at the stars. She thought of Veyron and Kadrin, of the lessons they had taught each other, and of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. One evening, Jaren joined her, his familiar grin breaking the silence. "Thinking about them again?" "Always," Ilara admitted with a smile. Jaren sat beside her, his gaze lifting to the stars. "Do you think they'll come back?" "They will," Ilara said confidently. "And when they do, we'll be ready. Because this time we won't just be showing them what it means to be human. We'll be learning what it means to be more." The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as though the universe itself was listening. And in that moment, Ilara knew that humanity's story was far from over. It was just beginning, written not in isolation, but in the boundless ink of connection,